Welcome to the Academy of Esports podcast. I am your host, James O'Hagan, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Kelli Dunlap. Now, Dr. Dunlap is a clinical psychologist and also an adjunct professor, head of community at Take This, also a game designer by trade. You see clients. I mean, you are my first, the tables have turned, if you will. No longer am I just going to my therapist. Now I have somebody who is a clinical psychologist here on the podcast. Dr. Dunlap, thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
And again, we're talking about not just, the games that we play. And again, your perspective is very unique in the fact that as the unicorn in your field, you are somebody who can design games, but also somebody who can research and works with clients maybe and speak to the language that some of your clients may face. But before we get too deep into that, because that is incredibly fascinating, we have some opening questions just to help the audience get to know you a little bit so I don't have to talk so much. First off, kickoff question number one. What is a game, and it doesn't have to be a video game, that stands out as having been important to you at some point in your life, and why was that experience meaningful?
So the easy go-to answer for me is the Halo franchise. So not just one game, but the entire series has had a really huge impact on my life. I went to college when Halo CE came out. That was the first one back in 2001. And because of playing Halo, I met a lot of people on my floor at the dorm. We would get together, like that's how we spent our evenings. We'd come back from our formal events, still all dressed up, and play Halo. We may have played until the wee hours of the morning and then gone to class afterwards. Who can say? But between, that during my college experience, that is literally how I met my husband. And why I stuck around for a while. He got to wear me down a bit because he had the Xbox. And so if I wanted to play Halo, I had to hang out with him. And yeah, so like when we got married, I had my Halo symbol actually like sewn into my wedding dress on the train. We had Arbiter and Master Chief cake toppers on our wedding cake. It's been a really huge part of my life, not just because I've been playing, but again, I met my soul mate, my battle buddy for life. We still play, we play Halo Infinite every Saturday with our old college friends. And another part of it is I ran an esports league focused on Griffball, which is a game type within the Halo universe. I ran that for about 10 years. So I got community management experience, esports experience. I know what it's like to run a league. I know what it's like to moderate a league in a first-person shooter space. So yeah, professionally, personally, Halo has had a massive impact on my life.
It's funny that I don't know how many people will say this about their college dorm experience, but mine at Purdue, I graduated in 99, but I'd say 97, 98, 99 for me. The game on the floor that I had never played until I showed up on the floor was StarCraft. And that was the one that we all played. And that's how I got to know everybody on the floor. So I get that very, very much so. All right. Question two. Maybe it's totally eccentric or maybe it's quite traditional, but what is your superpower? That thing that you do better than most people, or what do you wish you could do?
So I think my tolerance for grad school, getting a master's in clinical psych and then a doctorate in clinical psych and then a master's in game design after that, I think that's kind of a superpower, the persistence. But I'd like to think that it's bringing those two things together and advocating for, mental health in game spaces and advocating for games in mental health spaces. I'd like to think that's a superpower. If I could pick one, I wish I had some kind of artistic talent. I would love to be able to sing or or draw really well or play piano or something, just because I know that, music has such a huge impact. Art has such a huge impact on how people feel and how they react in the moment. And you can really lift someone's spirits by, using those kinds of things. And I can't even drag a tune in the bucket behind me. So I think that to me would be a superpower I wish I had.
Karaoke for me. That's part of my therapy, is just taking a night going out, and it was hard to not have it during the pandemic. So I understand exactly what you're saying, just to go out and go sing and perform in front of people and get applause. I get it, but try karaoke. Come on.
I don't want to inflict that on anybody. I'll rock band at home in, my off time.
Well, then let's get on to question 3. Name that one song that whenever it does hit your speakers, you're
Oh,
going to sing
anything by
along.
Backstreet Boys. Anything by
Get
Backstreet
out.
Boys.
Really?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, I'm a child of the 90s. I grew up on the Backstreet Boys. I had their posters on my lockers and in my closet. And I mean, I want it that way. How can you not just sing along? But like all of the albums, doesn't matter. If it's Backstreet Boys, I'm going to be belting it out. So sorry for whoever's around me at the time.
Well, that's good to know. We know how to trigger you. So if
Yes.
I'm in your presence, I'll just put it on and just go start singing.
Everybody. No, DMCA, sorry.
No, but see, you can do it. So you just have a little bravery. Yeah, come on. All right, next. Okay, so now we're getting into kind of the meat of our conversation, transitioning. Of course, you've already spoken about how games have not just impacted your life personally, but also the professional side of things. What is one thing in your field that surprises people when they first hear about it?
That it exists.
So, but I mean, clinical psychology. I mean, people go to therapists. They talk to people. What makes your, I guess, perspective unique when you say that it exists?
The intersection of mental health and games. That like I am somebody who studies games. I study mental health. I practice both of these things, and that is something that actually exists in the world. That you can use games for good. And, that can be really powerful, especially in clinical spaces. So there's a reputation that games are just either at best a waste of time or at worst somehow detrimental or harmful. And so in clinical spaces, it's really kind of odd to think like games, why would you do that? And then in game spaces, psychologists have not traditionally been involved. I mean, we see more now with like UX and UI. You see cognitive scientists and cognitive psychologists becoming more proactive in those spaces. But typically this combination is not something that people see. And if they do know like, oh, you are a psychologist, study video games, so you must study addiction and violence. And I'm like, well, actually, no. And that's a whole other rant. But, I focus on, what people get out of playing games and why they play and the joy that games can bring to people and, how we use them to help manage our own mental health and, the ancient history of games with people and how it's just part of our culture and kind of that cultural, social, psychological perspective of games that I have just because of my background and my training. So most of the time people are just kind of surprised that intersection even exists. And then if it does, it's not in the direction that they thought.
Well, and it's funny that people are so surprised. I know that I have read stories recently about therapists, clinical psychologists meeting their patients in virtual spaces to play together. Whenever I meet a new student, the first question that I ask that student is usually a very disarming question: is what video games do you play? But I find that opens up a whole new door of not just giving them a chance to talk to me and share something that they are, intrinsically passionate about. I'm very much about self-determination theory, the study of that. People say, well, that's addiction. And I say, no, what you're talking about is intrinsically motivated passion around feeling a sense of community, a sense of autonomy, and a sense of competency in the space. But the other part of it too is like my mother, what she said when I was a kid, she would, give me something to cook. I would be in the kitchen cooking with her and I would be distracted by the action of cooking, and that would help me to open up. Have you found that games is just one of those things? I mean, for some kids, I know it's just give them Legos to play with, give them something to do with their hands. Is that something that you find, but in your case, you're using games as kind of that pathway to maybe work with clients who are a little bit hard to open up with, or who are hard to open up?
Yeah. I mean, one nice thing is that people who play games love talking about the games they're playing, whether it's an adult, whether it's a kid I'm seeing who doesn't want to be there, like across the entire spectrum. It is so helpful to talk about what people enjoy doing. And it just happens that, over 2 billion people on the planet enjoy playing video games. So the chance that, the person in my office likes games is probably a pretty good one. And, since I myself enjoy playing games, we can either talk about them as equals, because in therapy, one thing that you really try to do is you don't want to have that power dynamic or minimize that power dynamic of I and the professional and you are the messed up person. That's a horrible, horrible way to frame it. And so seeing each other as peers. So if we play the same game, we can talk to each other, not as therapist and client, but as like two people who have a similar interest. And that can really help build rapport and trust. And then if I don't know that game, that gives them the opportunity to be the expert and to teach me. And so I flip that power differential on its head because now they're the one who knows more. And so again, especially working with kids, that can be really, really helpful. And as most K through 12 educators know, if you give a kid the chance to teach you something about something they enjoy, their eyes light up, they're super engaged, and you can see how passionate and intelligent they are about this one topic. Now, whether or not the school subject matches that, that's where maybe we get some disconnect between what someone's passion is and what our academic standards are. But, at least in the therapy room, I don't have any academic standards that I need to hold them to. I just want them to feel like, hey, you can talk about this thing that maybe sometimes other adults tell you is bad or you shouldn't do. But like, I get it. You're not going to be judged. I understand.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the classroom component as well, too, because you did a study with Megan Connell.
Yes.
About, and the title, it's a chapter from, I don't know which book this is. Oh, it's from Dr. Cowart's book. Of course it is.
Yep.
Video Games and Well-Being. Yep. But you wrote a chapter with Megan Connell called You Are the One Foretold, Finding Yourself Through the Journey, which I found to be a really interesting title, again, because this is about looking at the hero's journey, which, again, is not something I would typically expect a clinical psychologist to explore. I expect an English teacher to explore. In fact, one of my English teachers is looking at developing an online course around mythology and games and around the hero quest that we constantly see in games. What was your draw to that bit of information? Because you did talk about the switching of the power dynamics, and a lot of time through esports in schools, we see kids who come in as experts and teachers have to be the Ted Lasso, if you will, of supporting and cheerleading, but not necessarily understanding what the heck is going on. So what drew you to looking at the hero's journey?
I mean, it's one of those things that, like, when you see patterns over time, this is the hero's journey is, dates back to antiquity. When I was in high school,
Gilgamesh and yeah.
In high school, I took 4 years of Latin. I read the Aeneid in Latin because I was a nerd. And so I'm really familiar with like the old school kind of creation of these myths and these legends, and the fact that they have endured for centuries. Like, there's something there, there's something powerful because we keep telling these same stories over and over and over again. And in that way, games are the exact same medium in terms of not in telling these stories, because there's definitely something different when you are the one. And I think that's what drew me to this idea is, if I read the Aeneid, I am reading about Aeneas, or the Odyssey. You're reading about somebody else. If you're watching a movie, you're watching somebody else. But when you play a game, you are the one doing it. It's the only medium where instead of saying, hey, Scooby discovered the villain, it's I discovered the villain, or so-and-so solved that problem. No. I did it. I own that. I have agentic control in this space and I accomplished that thing. And so when you're looking at something like the hero's journey, it's all about facing hardship. It's all about having resilience and to, the one day everything's fine until something went wrong. And now you have to like fight this massive uphill battle. But just like the hero's journey in games, you can always win. The hero does come out on top, but it's scaffolded in the same way. And so looking at that from a clinical lens, it's really helpful because sometimes in our lives, we face things that are really challenging. We face things that are really difficult, and our entire normal life has been flipped upside down. Not like there's current events going on that, for the past 2 years that contribute to that, but hey, and we have to face these things, and when you go through adversity, and sometimes it's important to remember that when you hit your lowest, you can recover, you can come back. Not that it's easy, but again, I don't think anybody would ever argue that a hero's journey is easy, but it is possible. And it's that narrative, that thread of hope, I think that's so important across my field. Like, instilling hope in people is one of the most important things that, I as a clinician can do. And I think it's something important that game designers can do too.
That you bring up hope and you bring up the hero's journey, and you brought up, it doesn't even have to be one pathway anymore in that journey. As you read a book, you only can follow the one path that the story takes you. But a game like Undertale, which is still one of my most favorite games of all time, where yes, it's a hero's journey, but you can take it into that I'm going to kill, the genocide mode where you're killing everything in the game.
Yes.
Or the pacifist mode where you are peacefully solving all of your issues and problems. Or there's the middle of the road, which is kind of like you're playing in a neutral way where you're still attacking some things, but maybe, that's the beauty of all this is that a lot of these games now provide you multiple pathways to choose your adventure, if you will, like the old books used to do. Yep. Which choose your own adventure books. If you children don't know who are maybe watching, you could literally go read through a book and have a choice and decide what page to turn to. And sometimes the story would finish with you tragically dying, and sometimes the story would finish with you not tragically, but heroically winning. Games, and like I said, this hero's journey, what makes this fantastic in my mind is just how many different ways you can take it to in gameplay. And again, as a game designer, do you look at games from a totally different perspective, such as what I just described in Undertale, when you're looking at this through your game designer slash clinical psychologist eyes?
Yes. And sometimes I wish I could just sit and enjoy games. Like, for example, right now I'm playing a game called the Ace Attorney Chronicles. So it was recently released. It's part of the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney series. You're a courtroom lawyer and you find evidence, you do investigations. It's very puzzle-based, kind of Professor Layton-y type of feel. And, we got to a really critical decision point recently. We're like, oh gosh, do we have the evidence? And what evidence do we present? And I don't know which way I could see this going either way. I have to make this decision. And then we made the decision and we were like, yes, we're victorious. We figured it out. But then my game designer brain kicks in and goes, you know what, Kelly, you probably would have succeeded taking either path because, but you've made the player feel competent. You've made them feel smart. You've presented them with a difficult challenge that they've wrestled with and they came out victorious. That's a really, really good feeling to have. Even if in the back of my head, I know okay, it was probably built that way so that you get that good feeling. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just sometimes wish I could turn it off and just enjoy feeling like I'm a genius.
Well, and you are a genius. I mean, some of the stuff I read, you seem very much a genius to me. One of the questions I asked you about pre-interview was what are you most curious about right now or researching at this time and why? But you did just complete some research as well, just in streaming spaces and finding ways to support mental health for Twitch streamers during COVID. Yeah. I think that I read through that study and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so really important. Obviously, people now, as COVID was happening, Twitch was already happening. Sorry. Didn't want to make Twitch sound like a disease. A lot of people, of course, have been studying the effects of COVID on us. But when you were doing this, and again, you're looking at this from a mental health perspective for streamers, because I know that I connected with some of my people a little bit more through online spaces. And my friend Carrie Linden and I did a few streams where we played a shared game together that maybe we had never played before. Mm-hmm. But what were you finding in this research, or briefly describe what the study was that kind of keyed you into the importance of mental health in these spaces?
So in my role at Take This as the head of community, one of my jobs is we have a streaming ambassador program, which is basically people who have streaming platforms from 2 followers to 200,000 followers, but they care about mental health and they care about having a good mental health message. So I run that program. So I vet our streamers, I work with them, I make sure that they have what they need, so that we're basically bringing as much mental health to the community through the community as we can, because we are one place. But if we have all these wonderful streamers who have a huge reach, that's how you get kind of the messages out there. That's how you can disseminate mental health education. You can normalize talking about mental health and mental illness. So it's very, very cool and very, very important. But I was seeing a lot of the streamers that I work with, as well as the streamers that I watch, as well as when I stream, that mental health comes up. Even before the pandemic, mental health was a frequent comment in a lot of communities. So either I'm having a bad day to, hey, I just got this diagnosis, or I think I have this diagnosis, but I'm not sure, or I just need to talk to somebody. I feel really lonely. And so during COVID, I was really curious because a lot of my friends and colleagues who are streamers were talking about, man, this is like the fourth time this week I've had to refer somebody to a crisis line. I'm so tired. And so my research brain goes off. I'm like, well, if there's this many anecdotes, that sounds like a really good basis to start a study to see what is going on. I mean, it sounds like this is having a big impact, but that's what research is for, is that you go and you actually figure out, does this thing that sounds like it's a thing, is it actually real? And so I, along with my co-authors, one is Marie Shanley, also known as Anxiety, who's a wonderful mental health streamer and one of our ambassadors. And one of my former students, Jocelyn Wagner, we all collaborated on this paper because they both stream as well. So everybody who worked on this paper is both a mental health advocate, a researcher, and a streamer. So it's a pretty great trinity there. And we interviewed about 20 people and coded everything they said. We transcribed it, we coded it, and we pulled out the themes that we were seeing. And what was
good old qualitative study.
All qualitative. It is exhausting work. I know quantitative gets a good, a lot of praise because it's all numbers based. But let me tell you, if you've ever done qual research, you're a hero.
I have not completed my dissertation work, but it is all qualitative. So,
oh, you poor soul. It's hard, but it's so rich. And out of this research, I have these just tomes of quotes from streamers talking about everything from their own self-care to feeling stressed to how their communities have like rallied around one another to this really interesting thing that having to do with around burnout of my community needs me, so I have to be here. And I'm going through, even though I'm going through the same trauma as my community, the COVID, I have to be there. I somehow have to be this paragon of health and stability. And what was fascinating for me is, one, that came up, and two, that is so close to what mental health experts and mental health providers have been experiencing as providers during the pandemic. Is we are also having to cope with our own trauma, the exact same trauma our clients are going through. And that's very unusual because typically in a clinical setting, if I have a trauma I'm working through, like last year I lost my dog. She was an old girl and I love her. But like at that point, I would never take on a client who was grieving the loss of a pet because that would be too close to what I'm going through at that moment. But with COVID, none of us had a choice. We're all going through this. And so seeing streamers have the exact same experience, this idea of like, wait a minute, they're mental health front lines. They don't have the training, they don't have the support, they certainly don't have degrees, which you can be a fantastic advocate without any of that. But the problem is they have no support. And I think one of the most upsetting things I found was that all of these streamers were having to do their own research to find mental health resources. They were all putting in this extensive amount of time, like tracking down crisis lines and helplines and warm lines and ways to connect their community to support. And like they're all doing this individually. So they're reinventing the wheel thousands and thousands of times. And that's such a failure on the part of the mental health community. Why are we not doing more to reach out to these spaces? Why are we not doing the thing we say we do and we meet the client where they're at? Why are we not here on this massive platform with a massive reach, supporting people who are doing way more outreach work than we ever could? And I tell my ambassadors all the time that I'm so proud of them. They're not therapists, and that's good. You should not be doing therapy on Twitch. You should not do that. But the fact that they're able to kind of make it so people don't have to come see me. Because if someone feels heard and validated and like they're part of a community, they are much less likely to need to seek out a therapist. They're much less likely to slip into depression or into anxiety. And so like they're doing like preventative work in that way.
Well, and again, the importance of what you're talking about too isn't just the resources. As you said, people are going out and finding their own. And as we know with online anything, there's places where there's good quality resources, and then there are some that are not so quality. And I've seen what some of my own students search out and think is a good quality resource, and I go, oh boy, yeah. So what if I am a streamer? Is there a kit or something that I can get at now, or is there something that I should do to maybe become more educated on this?
So one thing that's native to the platform, there is a page on Twitch called Twitch Cares, and it is a collection of resources. It's very basic, but it's got the staples so that you're not having to go pull your own. The problem is that, and this is, I also point out in the paper, this Twitch Cares page, most people don't know it exists. And I think you have to go through 7 submenus to be able to find it. So thankfully, you can just Google Twitch Cares. It'll take you right there. But if you were ever to try to find it through their website, you probably never would. So that's one resource that's native to the platform. Of course, I work at Take This, which is literally a nonprofit that is focused on the mental health of game players and game developers, about providing resources and destigmatizing mental health and mental illness discussions in those communities. We have a ton of resources. Let me tell you. We have pages and pages of, from hotlines to warm lines to crisis intervention to, how do I talk about insurance? How do I know when it's time to see a mental health professional? Lots of resources there. It's always expanding. Right now we're very US centric because that's where we're based. So we're working really hard to expand our resources to have a more global audience because, that's important too. And so specific trainings, not particularly, or at least not ones that are of a significant quality. There's lots of people trying in this. Well, not lots of people. There's a couple people trying in this space. But one of the problems that I think is really problematic is that the line between providing information to be an advocate for mental health and providing information that empowers people to think that they're acting in more of a therapist kind of role, it's a very difficult line to walk. And so it's challenging. It's really challenging in that space. And so, I would tell I tell my streamers, I am a therapist, but you will never see me doing therapy on Twitch because that is wildly unethical and it's unsafe, which is why it's unethical. So please don't feel like you have to have the answer. Please don't feel like you need to be someone's therapist. Please don't feel like you have to carry someone else's burden, because you don't. That's not your role. So we talk a lot about boundaries. We talk a lot about parasocial relationships. We talk about trauma dumping. All these resources are things that, I work with the team that I'm on, and, we'll hopefully be able to share more of that as we develop it further. Because it's definitely a space that needs attention, and it just doesn't really get the attention it deserves.
Well, and as somebody who is so involved in this field as yourself, how do you stay informed about not just, mental health is seems like is a catch-all bucket for so many things right now.
Yes.
It is something that I tell people, and when they say, what are schools going to need in the next few years? I said, we haven't even started to crest on a mental health crisis that we are going to see in our schools with our children. And we don't know what that's going to be because we haven't seen anything like this in over 100 years.
Yeah.
But, it's not just you having to research mental health and clinical psychology, but also gaming. So how do you do it? How do you digest? Is it friends sending you things, or is this just, I have my go-to resources?
So honestly, the best thing I have is Twitter. On Twitter, there are several people that I follow. A lot of those people are also peers and colleagues of mine, but they're trusted sources. I also follow a bunch of different journals, so like Games and Culture or Games for Health, places of repute, so that when they publish, I get a notification in my feed. And I may not have time to go and read through the whole thing, but at least I know, like, oh, someone wrote about that, and I should go check that out. Or I can read the abstract to get a sense of what's going on. And then, the community of people that I'm with, the people I work with, are absolutely brilliant and doing a lot of this kind of research anyway. So, when we hang out and talk, we're like, oh, did you see the latest article? Maybe not the healthiest work-life boundary there. But that is, I wish there was something fancier, but no, it really is Twitter, watching what my colleagues are doing and saying, looking at what's coming out of the journals. So that's for the academic side. But then also one thing that I'm really proud of is, the being part of the streaming community myself. So I'm listening to my friends, not that are not psychologists. They don't have degrees necessarily in this field, but they're talking about the experience of being a streamer during a pandemic, or being an esports athlete under pressure, or trying to, be a student during this time when remote learning doesn't work for them. And so I think it's important to not only have the professional expertise, from academics and luminary thinkers and things like that. And it's equally important to understand and to be tapped into the lived experience outside of that ivory tower. And like, okay, what you're talking about in clinical practice, what does it actually look like when it's out in the world and it's not sanitized and it's dirty and it's complex, because that's what life is. and keeping those both in mind.
Well, and the thing for all you little leaguers out there who may be starting your dissertation work, Dr. Dunlap did give you a little tip there. Read the abstract, read the conclusion, and then if it finds it interesting, go back and read the rest of the study.
Yes.
Don't try to read the whole study first and then, don't do that.
No, you'll cry.
Yeah. And because you'll read 60 pages and go, well, I don't really need this. Because
I don't need this, or I don't understand this, or this isn't relevant.
Yeah. All right. As we start to wrap up here, again, Dr. Dunlap, thank you so much for being here today. You did make mention in our pre-interview or conversation question. I don't call these interviews, I call them conversations. There's a person doing great things in the field, and you brought up Dr. Sarah Hayes, who I love. Dr. Hayes. I've never met Dr. Hayes, but I know of Dr. Hayes through GamerDoc's playing of Legend of Zelda. And okay. So, yes. And the two of them together are like peas and carrots when they stream together. Yes. But why did you feel Dr. Hayes is somebody who we should all know about?
I mean, with, the title of the Academy of Esports, I know when I think about esports and mental health, she is the person I think of. The same way that if we're talking about sports medicine in esports, I think of GamerDoc. Both
Lindsay
of them.
McGuire, yeah.
They founded Queer Women of Esports. I believe Sarah's title is Lead of People or People Lead, something like that. And of course, Lindsay is the founder of it or co-founder of it. And they're just doing really, really amazing work. It reminds me a lot of when I started, when I was doing my dissertation for undergrad and for grad school of this is something that's really important and no one else is talking about it. Or if they are, it's only focusing on the negative. So what else can I add to this conversation that brings my fascination and my passions of psychology and games? And how can I make the world a better place? Not to be cheesy, but that's, pretty true. And so not only is Dr. Hayes a fantastic clinician and a wonderful peer. She's done some fascinating research around not just games, but personality psychology. And then she's just a powerhouse in the space around esports and the mental health implications for players, and what it means to be an esports athletes, the potential benefits of playing esports, and, keeping your mental wellness throughout all of it.
Well, and as we start to sign off, again, Dr. Dunlap, I will be meeting with you and Dr. Cohort in a few weeks. We will be on a panel. Well, I'll be emceeing and leading the panels at Purdue University, April 8th and 9th, though you will not be there, nor will Dr. Cohort, sadly, but we will make the best of it as we can with a Zoom panel, if you will, about mental health and gaming. Again, that's April 8th and 9th at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana, my alma mater. Anything else that you would like to share with the audience before we get out of here, Dr. Dunlap? Any final words or thoughts, or you wanted to talk about Ace Attorney some more?
I could talk about that all day. But I guess I'd like to always leave on a high note and just encourage everybody that, to take time to play. And play is fundamental to health and happiness throughout the lifespan. It doesn't matter whether you're my 5-month-old or my 95-year-old grandmother. You are entitled to rest. You are entitled to relaxation. You are entitled to play. These are not things you earn. These are things that you are entitled to as a human being. So please remember that your productivity does not determine your worth. Take time for yourself. Play, enjoy, have fun, play a game, or just, do something that brings you joy.
I don't need to add a thing to that. Dr. Kelli Dunlap of Take This, thank you so much for being a guest on the Academy of Esports podcast today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.